Special Forces, huh? Sure, kid. The words landed like an unexpected clap of thunder across the school courtyard, echoing off the brick walls and bouncing through the scattered groups of students. Ethan Johnson froze mid-step, backpack straps tightening against his shoulders as he glanced up at Officer James Parker, standing a few feet away, hands resting casually on his belt, a smirk playing across his face. The autumn air carried the faint scent of cut grass and the warmth of late morning sun, but nothing could soften the sudden tension radiating from the officer. Ethan took a deep breath, his small frame stiffening, his eyes locking onto the gleam of Parker's polished badge, the sunlight glinting off its edges in sharp, fleeting flashes. Around them, the chatter of students dulled, sneakers squeaked lightly against the asphalt, lockers clicked open and closed. Yet for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, every pair of eyes drawn toward the unfolding confrontation. Ethan's fingers clenched the straps of his backpack, feeling the slight weight of his worn copy of Elite Forces of America pressing against his chest, a tangible reminder of the stories he had read countless times, stories of bravery, discipline, and fathers who trained their sons to carry themselves with purpose. The officer leaned slightly forward, eyebrows raised, a glance toward the surrounding students who snickered behind him, their laughter uncertain, their curiosity piqued. Ethan's pulse quickened, but his stance didn't falter. He planted his feet firmly, chin lifted, and spoke in a voice calm yet firm. "Yes, sir, my dad is in the Special Forces. He could be here any second." The words seemed almost to hang in the air, dense with quiet courage, contrasting sharply with the casual arrogance of the officer, whose smile faltered for the briefest moment before returning, more tightly controlled. Ethan's gaze never wavered, scanning the subtle reactions of his classmates, noticing the shift in the atmosphere as whispers circulated and some students drew back, sensing the gravity behind the boy's simple statement. A gentle breeze lifted a strand of Ethan's hair across his forehead, the sunlight catching tiny specks of dust in the air, turning them into a fleeting shimmer that danced around his determined expression. The officer shifted, adjusting his stance, his boots scraping faintly against the pavement, a motion so small yet filled with the weight of authority, a contrast to Ethan's unwavering presence. In that suspended moment, every heartbeat seemed amplified, every inhaled breath carrying the weight of anticipation, as if the courtyard itself had slowed, waiting for the next move, waiting for the invisible line between disbelief and recognition to be crossed, while Ethan stood there, a small figure of resolve, embodying a quiet strength that could not be mocked or diminished by mere words alone. The sun hung low over the campus, casting long shadows across the rows of lockers, the crisp autumn breeze carrying the faint scent of apples and freshly cut grass. Ethan Johnson shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of his backpack, feeling the familiar texture of the worn patch on the bottom corner, a small emblem of the Eagle Squadron that he had sewn himself after reading about the elite units his father had trained in. His eyes wandered briefly to the corner of the courtyard where a few younger students kicked at the remnants of fallen leaves, their laughter soft and uncertain, mixing with the occasional slam of locker doors and the echo of sneakers against tile. Ethan's mind replayed the stories his father had told him during their weekend calls, descriptions of drills, problem-solving under pressure, and the quiet courage required to lead in moments when hesitation could change everything. Each word had built an image in Ethan's head of discipline, responsibility, and the steady weight of knowing that actions mattered, that words carried meaning. He felt that weight now, not as pressure but as a calm steadiness that filled his chest, aligning with the rising tension around him as Officer James Parker, still smirking, adjusted the cuff of his uniform, the sunlight glinting off the polished buttons and the thin line of the badge pinned neatly above his heart. Students nearby had started to slow their movements, glancing curiously, sensing that the moment held more than a passing joke or typical playground banter, that something significant hung in the air like a faint but undeniable current. Ethan's hands rested lightly on the straps of his backpack, feeling the slight give in the material, the faint roughness under his fingertips, grounding him as he exhaled slowly, allowing the rhythm of his breath to steady his heartbeat. He felt the autumn air shift slightly, brushing against his face, lifting a few strands of his dark hair, and he let his gaze sweep across the courtyard with quiet confidence, taking in the scattered clusters of students, the distant outline of the football field, the sharp corners of the modern brick buildings framing the scene. All of it grounding him in the reality of his school day, while simultaneously holding the promise of the story he carried with him, the story of a father whose discipline and dedication had quietly shaped the boy, standing firm and unwavering. A few classmates murmured, nudging each other, exchanging glances as if trying to read the invisible line of courage and truth that Ethan seemed to carry effortlessly, their whispers barely audible over the distant hum of a passing school bus and the faint wind brushing through the branches of a nearby oak tree. Ethan's shoes scuffed lightly against the concrete as he shifted his weight, the small sound echoing softly in the now quieter courtyard, each step a silent assertion of presence and intention. He could feel the subtle pressure of being watched, of all eyes on him, and rather than shrinking, he allowed that awareness to anchor him, to heighten his sense of clarity and purpose, as though the world had slowed to match the quiet determination emanating from a boy who knew the truth and refused to be intimidated by appearances. His heart remained steady, chest rising and falling in measured rhythm, as the sunlight caught in the small flecks of dust around him, illuminating the invisible halo of anticipation, the sense that change was imminent, that the ordinary flow of a school day could transform in an instant if he maintained the calm confidence that had been instilled in him, that quiet certainty that his father's lessons had built not just knowledge but a quiet resilience that was visible to anyone willing to see. Every detail around him, the soft creak of the lockers, the faint flutter of leaves across the asphalt, the distant bark of a dog from a neighboring street, became part of the tapestry of a moment stretched taut with expectation, a canvas on which courage and reputation would collide, waiting for the invisible but unmistakable presence of truth to make itself known, standing steady in the form of a 12-year-old boy whose posture, gaze, and unshaken breath carried the weight of legacy and the quiet force of unwavering integrity. Officer James Parker straightened his posture, the morning light glinting sharply off the polished surface of his badge, reflecting the authority he carried with every movement. And yet a subtle uncertainty had begun to crease his brow as he observed Ethan Johnson, standing firm and calm despite the whispers and shifting glances of the students around them. The courtyard, now quieter than before, seemed suspended in a delicate balance, the distant hum of a school bell in the background marking time, yet feeling oddly irrelevant in the gravity of the moment. Parker's hand rested lightly on the holster of his uniform, an unconscious gesture of readiness, while his eyes flicked toward the cluster of younger students who had been watching, their expressions a mixture of amusement, skepticism, and curiosity. Ethan adjusted the strap of his backpack again, the small movements precise and controlled, a reflection of the focus he had inherited from his father and honed through hours of reading and studying the discipline of elite forces. The sunlight, filtering through the branches of the oak trees lining the courtyard, danced across the surface of the asphalt in flickering patterns, highlighting the faint scuffs and cracks that spoke of years of footsteps, games, and ordinary school life. Yet these ordinary details now served as a backdrop to an extraordinary moment. Ethan's gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in the lines of lockers, the open doors of classrooms just beyond, and the subtle movements of passing students, while holding a posture of confidence that belied his age, the quiet steadiness of a boy who understood the weight of truth and the power of presence. The rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze mixed with distant laughter, creating a soft soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the tension emanating from the officer, whose smirk had faded slightly as he processed the certainty and poise in Ethan's stance. Every small gesture, from the way Ethan's shoes met the pavement to the slight tightening of his fingers around the backpack straps, carried a sense of intention, a silent declaration that he was seen, heard, and grounded in the reality of his own strength. Parker's eyes narrowed subtly, assessing, calculating, aware that the usual patterns of control and intimidation were being challenged not with force, but with unwavering composure and quiet confidence. The courtyard felt smaller, enclosed, each sound and movement amplified, as the interplay between authority and integrity played out under the open sky, a tension that invited every onlooker to lean in, to sense the shift in energy, the unspoken dialogue of courage standing against expectation. Ethan's breath remained steady, each inhalation and exhalation measured, the rhythm of his calm heartbeat echoing in the subtle rise and fall of his chest, grounding him as he prepared to navigate the next instant of scrutiny and anticipation. He glanced briefly toward the distant bleachers, the flagpole casting a long shadow across the grass, the details ordinary yet suddenly charged with the weight of attention, and he allowed the steadiness of his stance to radiate outward, filling the space around him with an unspoken assurance that presence, clarity, and honesty could hold power equal to any uniform or authority figure. Parker's lips pressed into a thin line, the shifting expression of someone who had been accustomed to control, now confronting the quiet inevitability of respect earned rather than demanded, while Ethan, small but unyielding, remained the center of a delicate tableau that seemed to pause time itself, the sunlight, breeze, and ambient sounds combining to underscore a moment in which character and truth held a quiet yet undeniable dominance, and all around them, the courtyard watched, breath held, poised on the edge of the revelation that had yet to arrive. The courtyard seemed to stretch longer as Ethan Johnson's calm presence held against the subtle tension radiating from Officer James Parker, the sunlight catching the edges of Parker's uniform and reflecting off the polished leather of his shoes with a sharp clarity that contrasted with the soft shadows dancing on the asphalt from the nearby trees. Ethan shifted slightly, feeling the slight weight of his backpack, the texture of the fabric familiar and grounding, a small but constant reminder of the world he carried with him and the discipline that had been instilled by countless conversations with his father. Around them, students had paused in their movements, some leaning slightly on lockers, others hovering near doorways, their curiosity palpable as they sensed a shift in the energy of the space, a subtle recognition that the ordinary flow of the school day had been interrupted by something remarkable. Parker's eyes flicked from Ethan to the observing students, noting the quiet awe on their faces, the way some of them had instinctively straightened in response to Ethan's posture, the careful alignment of his shoulders, the lifted chin, the steady gaze that met each glance without hesitation. The air carried a gentle rustle from the leaves above, a soft murmur blending with distant footsteps from classrooms further along the hall, the faint hum of a heating vent, and the occasional click of a locker door, all forming a backdrop that emphasized the stillness at the heart of the courtyard. Ethan's hands rested lightly on the straps of his backpack, fingers tracing the subtle contours, and he exhaled slowly, feeling the rhythm of his breath synchronize with the quiet anticipation of the moment, a steady pulse that contrasted with the slight tension in Parker's jaw and the rigid line of his shoulders. The sunlight illuminated faint dust motes swirling gently in the air, each catching a glint of brightness, as if the courtyard itself were suspended in a delicate balance, waiting, observing, and holding its breath. Parker shifted his weight, his boots producing a soft scrape against the pavement, a sound amplified in the calm, making it feel heavier than usual, a subtle reminder of the authority he carried and the usual expectation of immediate compliance from those around him. Yet Ethan did not waver. His focus remained forward, eyes scanning not just the man before him but the entire space, aware of the whispers, the quiet glances, the small movements that carried weight, and drawing strength from the quiet confidence that had been nurtured within him, the steady core of belief in truth and integrity. The breeze lifted slightly, rustling Ethan's hair and the edges of the pages peeking from his backpack, adding motion to the stillness, emphasizing the contrast between calm readiness and imposed authority, while Parker's gaze narrowed imperceptibly, calculating, evaluating the unexpected resilience before him, the presence of a boy who, despite his youth and the surrounding assumptions, held an undeniable force in his composure. Every detail, the flickering light on the asphalt, the muted echoes of laughter from a distant corridor, the subtle warmth of the morning sun on the students' faces, coalesced into a tableau of anticipation, a suspended moment in which each heartbeat, each small movement, each breath carried weight, and Ethan stood at the center of it all, quiet but resolute, embodying a silent challenge that spoke louder than words ever could, waiting for the unfolding of the next instant that would shift the balance of authority and expectation in ways that had yet to reveal themselves. Officer James Parker's eyes narrowed as he took a cautious step closer, his boots scraping softly against the asphalt, the faint echo carrying across the courtyard. But Ethan Johnson did not move an inch, his small frame rooted to the spot, the straps of his backpack pressing slightly against his shoulders as if anchoring him to the earth itself. Around them, students had stopped their casual chatter entirely, forming a loose circle, the soft rustle of clothing and the subtle creak of lockers punctuating the quiet, their gazes flicking between the officer and the boy. Sensing the tension that had built without any overt confrontation, a kind of silent standoff that held everyone's attention. Ethan's eyes remained steady, scanning the courtyard just enough to take in the environment, noting the angle of the sun reflecting off the windows of the adjacent classroom, the shadows of the tree branches stretching across the pavement, the distant hum of traffic from the street beyond the campus walls, each detail grounding him as he prepared for whatever would come next. Officer Parker shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a subtle movement that betrayed his growing uncertainty, the usual confidence in his posture now tempered by the unexpected composure and quiet authority emanating from Ethan. The boy's chest rose and fell with deliberate calm, each inhale steady, each exhale measured, the rhythm acting as a quiet assertion of presence that seemed to extend beyond his small frame, filling the space with an invisible tension that demanded acknowledgment without a word spoken. A gentle breeze lifted the edges of Ethan's dark hair, brushing lightly against his forehead, while the faint creak of the distant school bell mingled with the soft murmur of students holding their breath, their attention riveted on the unfolding moment, the courtyard itself seeming to pause in anticipation. Parker's gaze flicked toward the scattered students, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the way some had unconsciously straightened, the soft intake of breath, all signs that they recognized a moment out of the ordinary, that the usual dynamic of authority and submission had been challenged in a way that could not be ignored. Ethan adjusted the weight of his backpack slightly, the small sound of the fabric brushing against itself faint but audible, a reminder of the tangible reality grounding him in the present, while Parker's fingers tapped lightly against his belt, an unconscious gesture of thought and calculation, measuring the unexpected force of character and truth before him. The light caught the faint glimmer of Ethan's badge from the Eagle Squadron sewn on his backpack, a subtle symbol of training, discipline, and inherited strength. A quiet reminder that the boy carried with him the lessons and presence of his father, the shadow of authority and expertise waiting beyond the horizon. The courtyard, bathed in the soft warmth of the morning sun, held a delicate stillness, punctuated by the occasional distant laughter or shifting footstep. Yet all sound seemed muted against the sharp contrast of Ethan's unwavering stance and Parker's subtle, unsettled movements. Each heartbeat, each controlled motion of the boy, each careful, measured breath built upon the tension like layers of invisible weight pressing against the air itself, creating a scene in which observation, attention, and anticipation were as tangible as the concrete underfoot. Every participant in the courtyard sensing that something remarkable was about to unfold in the silent exchange between a young boy and the officer who had underestimated him. The courtyard seemed to pause in a delicate hush, the sunlight streaming through the branches of the surrounding oak trees, casting long, slender shadows across the asphalt and illuminating the soft glimmer of dust in the air like tiny stars suspended in the morning warmth. Ethan Johnson stood perfectly still, the straps of his backpack resting lightly on his shoulders, his dark eyes scanning the space around him with quiet awareness, absorbing the subtle movements of the students who had unconsciously stepped back, their attention now fully captured by the unusual stillness and the calm authority radiating from a boy who, despite his age, seemed to command the very air around him. The faint rustle of leaves in the light breeze blended with the distant hum of traffic from the street beyond the school walls, the occasional creak of a locker door, and the soft murmur of whispers among onlookers, all contributing to the suspended rhythm of the moment, each sound emphasized by the deliberate quiet of the unfolding scene. Officer James Parker's gaze shifted subtly, taking in Ethan's stance, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the slight movement of his fingers brushing the edge of the backpack strap, and the small glint of sunlight catching on the Eagle Squadron patch sewn into the corner. symbol of training, discipline, and inherited resolve that seemed almost to radiate outward. The air felt charged, as if the courtyard itself were holding its breath, the usual din of a busy school morning fading into the background, leaving only the measured cadence of Ethan's presence and the silent acknowledgment of the observers. Students leaned slightly forward, a few pressing lightly against lockers, their faces reflecting curiosity, admiration, and the subtle thrill of witnessing a quiet challenge to authority, a confrontation held not with words of aggression, but with the calm confidence of integrity standing unyielding. The soft sway of branches overhead cast moving shadows that danced across the courtyard in time with the faint, uneven rhythm of footsteps from those who had paused in their routines, creating a visual echo of the tension and anticipation that filled the space. Ethan adjusted his weight slightly, the shift so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if not for the way the sunlight caught the edges of his backpack and the faint glimmer of the patch. Yet it was a deliberate action, a grounding motion that reminded him of who he was and the values instilled in him through countless lessons from his father about patience, presence, and the quiet power of calm. Parker's posture remained rigid, the officer's eyes flicking toward the observing students, registering their collective gaze, and noting for the first time that the usual dynamics of authority and submission were being redefined by something other than rank, by the steady, composed force of a young boy who embodied confidence, clarity, and truth. The gentle breeze lifted a loose strand of Ethan's hair across his forehead, brushing lightly against his skin, and he let it fall naturally, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that added to the sense of calm assurance he radiated. In that suspended instant, every element, the soft warmth of the morning sun, the faint hum of the distant street, the subtle movement of leaves, the stillness of the students, and the silent tension in the body of Officer Parker, combined to create a moment of profound anticipation. The courtyard itself transformed into a stage for quiet courage, waiting for the revelation that would shift the balance and leave an impression on every observer present. As Ethan Johnson stood unwavering, embodying the silent strength and unshakable resolve that had become the center of attention and the measure of true presence. The distant rumble of a school bus faded as a black SUV slowly rolled into the edge of the courtyard, its polished surface gleaming under the morning sun, drawing the eyes of every student and staff member present, the low hum of the engine blending with the soft whisper of wind through the trees, creating a sudden, almost cinematic pause in the everyday rhythm of the campus. Ethan Johnson's chest rose and fell with calm precision, his small hands gripping the straps of his backpack lightly, eyes widening slightly as he recognized the familiar figure stepping out of the vehicle, a presence that carried an undeniable authority and quiet command that seemed to ripple through the air around him. Captain Marcus Johnson, tall and solidly built in a crisp military uniform, moved with deliberate, confident steps across the asphalt, the sunlight glinting off the polished insignia on his chest, each motion measured, purposeful, and undeniably commanding, yet somehow blending seamlessly with an air of approachable steadiness. Officer James Parker's expression shifted noticeably, the smirk fading into a rigid stillness as he observed the father's composed stride, his usual confidence tempered by the weight of recognition, the realization settling subtly across his features that the usual dynamics of power he relied upon were now being quietly challenged. Students murmured softly among themselves, their attention captivated by the silent gravitas of the scene, the subtle shifting of shadows across the courtyard heightening the intensity, the gentle sway of tree branches and the occasional flutter of leaves framing the moment in a natural cinematic tableau that emphasized the contrast between ordinary surroundings and extraordinary presence. Ethan straightened, chin lifting slightly, shoulders squared as he met his father halfway, the subtle glint of pride and reassurance. Reflected in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgment of shared understanding and strength passed between them without a word, a silent communication that resonated throughout the courtyard, touching each observer with the weight of anticipation finally poised for resolution. Parker's hands rested lightly at his sides, a faint tightening of fingers betraying his sudden awareness of the shift in authority, while his gaze flicked between Ethan and Captain Johnson, registering the calm certainty that radiated from both father and son, an unspoken reminder that integrity and presence could outweigh assumptions and imposed hierarchy. The sunlight shifted slightly, glinting off the polished shoes and insignia, casting long reflections across the asphalt, highlighting the subtle details. The slight sway of a uniform jacket in the breeze, the measured pace of footsteps, the quiet but unmistakable aura of discipline and command emanating from Captain Johnson, contrasting with the restrained tension in Parker's posture. Ethan's shoulders relaxed just slightly, a micro-expression of ease as he sensed the support and authority standing beside him, the silent reassurance that came from shared history and values, grounding him in the moment while amplifying the impact of his composure. The courtyard seemed to exhale collectively, the wind rustling leaves gently as though nature itself acknowledged the pivotal presence, the ordinary sounds of footsteps, distant chatter, and locker doors fading into the background, leaving only the concentrated energy of the young boy, his father, and the officer who now stood silently, absorbing the undeniable shift in circumstance. Every eye present remained locked on the trio, the subtle interplay of shadows and sunlight accentuating the quiet drama, the tension giving way to recognition, and the air thick with anticipation that something meaningful, something extraordinary in its simplicity and clarity, had arrived, changing the invisible balance of respect and expectation that had hovered over the courtyard moments before. Captain Marcus Johnson placed a steady hand on Ethan Johnson's shoulder, the warmth and firmness of the touch conveying reassurance and shared understanding without a single word being spoken, and the young boy's eyes flicked up to meet his father's gaze, a subtle smile forming as he felt the quiet acknowledgment of his courage and composure. Officer James Parker exhaled slowly, the rigid tension in his shoulders easing slightly as he processed the undeniable truth standing before him. The careful confidence of a father and son paired in a way that demanded respect and reflection, a contrast to the earlier dismissiveness that had filled the air moments before. The students around them began to release the taut energy that had held them frozen, some shifting their weight from foot to foot, others leaning against lockers with soft expressions of awe and admiration. The courtyard alive with the quiet hum of realization that they had witnessed something beyond the ordinary rhythm of a school day. Ethan adjusted the strap of his backpack, the small movement graceful and deliberate, and he allowed himself a brief glance at Parker, whose eyes, previously sharp and mocking, now reflected contemplation, a recognition that authority was not always determined by uniform alone, but by the integrity and presence of those who carried themselves with quiet certainty. The sun continued its slow climb, casting dappled light across the pavement and highlighting the textures of the scattered leaves, the slight imperfections in the asphalt, and the muted reflections off the windows lining the courtyard, all details observed and appreciated in the heightened awareness of a moment suspended between what had been and what now could be. Captain Johnson's presence radiated calm authority, each step deliberate, each gesture measured, signaling not only his own skill and experience, but also the profound support and trust he placed in his son, a reinforcement of the values Ethan had absorbed and embodied through patience, study, and quiet determination. Parker's lips pressed into a thin line as he processed the tableau, the officer's mind absorbing the lesson silently, the shift in perception subtle but unmistakable, acknowledging the potency of character, courage, and the unspoken bond between a father and son standing unwavering in a world that often judged too quickly and without full understanding. The soft rustle of leaves and distant sounds of students settling back into their routines created a gentle auditory backdrop that emphasized the contrast between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the mundane steps of a school morning juxtaposed with the extraordinary presence and composure of a boy who had remained steadfast, his integrity shining through the subtle, profound drama of the courtyard. Ethan allowed his shoulders to relax just slightly, feeling the reinforcement of his father's calm strength beside him, a grounding presence that magnified his own quiet authority, while the soft play of sunlight and shadows across the space seemed to honor the shift in recognition, the acknowledgement that courage and honesty could alter the dynamic of expectation in ways far more powerful than ridicule or dismissal. Officer Parker adjusted his stance again, a small nod of acknowledgment passing almost imperceptibly across his features, an unspoken admission that he had misjudged the situation, the boy, and the lesson unfolding before him, while Ethan and Captain Johnson shared a quiet, mutual glance that conveyed completion, understanding, and the subtle triumph of integrity over assumption. The students began to disperse slowly, whispers trailing behind them as they carried with them the sense of having witnessed an important moment, one that would linger in memory, a testament to the strength of quiet confidence, the power of steadfast presence, and the resonance of values lived and demonstrated in the simplest yet most profound of ways, as father and son turned together toward the edges of the courtyard, leaving a space now filled with reflection, respect, and the silent acknowledgment of a moment that had quietly but unmistakably redefined authority. The sun had risen higher now, casting a warm glow across the courtyard that made the colors of the leaves and bricks richer, the shadows softer. Yet every detail seemed to hum with the memory of the events that had just unfolded, a subtle resonance that lingered in the air long after the students had begun to move on. Ethan Johnson adjusted the straps of his backpack, shoulders relaxing completely as he stood side by side with his father, Captain Marcus Johnson, the small micro-movement of their hands brushing briefly as an unspoken acknowledgment of shared strength and silent triumph. Officer James Parker remained a few steps back, his posture more reflective than rigid, observing the pair with a quiet understanding settling into his features, the usual assertiveness replaced by a tempered awareness that presence, integrity, and honesty had their own authority, undeniable and enduring. The students who had gathered at the periphery of the courtyard now dispersed in slow motion, their whispers carrying the story of what they had seen, of a boy whose calm courage had reshaped expectation, of a father whose quiet strength reinforced that legacy, and of an officer who had witnessed firsthand the potency of composure and truth. Ethan's eyes swept over the courtyard once more, noting the scattered leaves, the glint of sunlight on metal and glass, the faint shimmer of dust in the light, each detail grounding him while simultaneously emphasizing the significance of the moment. The ordinary textures of the school environment transformed into the backdrop for an extraordinary display of character and quiet victory. Captain Johnson's footsteps were measured and steady, the subtle click of polished shoes against asphalt forming a rhythmic cadence that blended seamlessly with the soft murmur of the students and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, a soundtrack to the silent acknowledgment of values, courage, and recognition that had transpired without a single raised voice or hasty action. Parker's gaze lingered on Ethan for a long moment, registering the composure, the clarity, and the understated authority carried by a boy who had stood firm against skepticism and derision, a silent lesson unfolding in real time about respect, perception, and the quiet power of integrity that did not need to be loudly asserted to be felt by all. The sunlight continued to filter through the branches, casting gentle patterns across the asphalt, the interplay of light and shadow echoing the shifting dynamic of the scene, each subtle movement, each small change in posture, carrying the weight of recognition and the lingering sense of achievement, the moment a quiet but enduring testament to character. Ethan and his father began walking slowly toward the exit of the courtyard, their movements synchronized, a calm rhythm that contrasted with the previously tense air, leaving behind a space now imbued with reflection, admiration, and an almost palpable respect that extended even to Officer Parker, whose eyes softened as he watched the pair move away. The students gradually returned to their routines, laughter and conversation resuming with a gentler cadence, but the sense of having witnessed something remarkable lingered in the air, a quiet energy that would echo through the hallways, the classrooms, and the minds of everyone present for hours, even days to come. The wind stirred slightly, lifting loose strands of hair and carrying with it the scent of the autumn leaves, a reminder of the continuity of the ordinary world alongside the extraordinary moment. As Ethan glanced up at his father once more, a fleeting smile shared, and together they left the courtyard, the sunlight reflecting off windows and pavement, casting long, gentle shadows that seemed to mark the invisible trail of courage, integrity, and quiet triumph, leaving behind a scene that would remain etched in memory, The unspoken message of respect and moral victory settling into the hearts and minds of all who had observed.